Hello everyone, my name is Holger and this is the final part of a 6-part video series that previews the upcoming Season 2 of the Wheel of Time TV show. If you have not watched the earlier parts yet, then I strongly recommend you do so first. The link to the playlist should be at the top of your screen. In this final part I will first look at secrets hidden in Season 1 that I expect to be relevant for Season 2, and then move on to predictions for Season 3 and beyond. Spoiler warning, this video does contain spoilers. I recommend that before watching this video you watch the first season of the TV show and read all of the books first up until book 14, A Memory of Light, plus the prequel New Spring, in order to avoid having your reading enjoyment spoiled. So we're going to start with Season 1 secrets, and talking about secrets, before I start telling you about the secrets I have found, let me first give a shout out to Lauren from Unraveling the Pattern, who also recently published an amazing video about secrets in Season 1. His secrets are mostly Easter eggs that were hidden in Season 1 and that foreshadow book events in sometimes very clever ways. So if you enjoy finding out about secrets, please watch his video as well. The secrets I'm talking about in this video are a little different. Most of them are non-book secrets. This means information in Season 1 that does not correspond to any book events, but which seems to foreshadow storylines specifically written for Season 2 of the TV show. To begin with, I'm going to look at the Liandrin chase scene in the cold open of Episode 1, which actually contains more than one secret. First of all, this is the first time that we get clear evidence that Liandrin is a member of the Black Archer, but in order to see that, we need to put two pieces of evidence together. The first piece is in Episode 4, where Liandrin states, "If he were to break out, the 3 oaths would allow us to gentle him." Liandrin is referring to Logain here, and apparently suggests that gentling a man in the field without a trial can sometimes be prevented by one of the 3 oaths. The only oath she could possibly be referring to here is the 3rd oath, which prohibits the use of the One Power as a weapon, except in certain situations, such as extreme cases of self-defense. Liandrin is apparently suggesting that if the group could manufacture a situation in which they have to defend themselves, then gentling would be allowed by the 3rd oath. This suggests that in the show, gentling, and probably also stilling, someone without a trial are considered users of the One Power as a weapon. In the books this is never stated explicitly, but this interpretation is consistent with the books, considering how Rand causes Aes Sedai to be stilled when he breaks out of the box at Dumai's Wells. However, that means that Liandrin should not be able to gentle the man in Episode 1 during the chase scene, because there is clearly no self-defense situation here. The wording of the oath is, "in the last extreme defense of her life," and from the books we know that the interpretation of that clause is pretty strict. In the books after Dumai's Wells, a group of Aes Sedai makes it clear to Perrin that the mere presence of other channelers in the vicinity is not sufficient for this. There has to be an immediate direct danger to the life of a channeler. In the Liandrin chase scene, not only is there no such immediate danger, but there is no defense situation at all. Liandrin's group is on the offense, and the man never gives any indication that he even considers attacking Liandrin's group. Since the exception to the 3rd oath clearly does not apply here, Liandrin should not be able to gentle the man. The fact that she is able to do so anyway proves that Liandrin is not subject to the 3rd oath. This means that she is a member of the Black Archer, which is the first secret hidden in Season 1. This immediately leads to another secret. The other 4 sisters who are with Liandrin do not object to Liandrin's gentling, even though as Red Sisters, from the training they must surely know that gentling in the field is subject to the 3rd oath and should not be possible here. The fact that they do not react to this in any way suggests that they know that Liandrin is violating the 3rd oath. This means those 4 other sisters are likely black as well, which is the second secret hidden in the scene. The next secret hidden in the scene will probably be one of the biggest bombshells early in Season 2, because it deviates significantly from the books. Secret number 3. Moiraine has known since at least Season 1, Episode 1, that Liandrin is black. How do we know? Very simple. In this scene, Moiraine sees Liandrin gentle the man, and also sees that there is no self-defense involved. Therefore, she knows that Liandrin is black, in the same way we know. The remaining issue is still how those secrets will be revealed. We have a hint for that from an observation made by Giki Eri in her Season 2 location video, where she pointed out that during Season 2 shooting, likely for Episodes 1 or 2, cast and crew went back to the same location where the Liandrin chase scene was shot in Season 1. This suggests that additional footage for the scene will be filmed for Season 2. That is why I suggested in the previous video that we will likely see a new version of the scene in Season 2, most likely as a flashback in a cold open, with the most important takeaways being an introduction to the Black Archer, by seeing Moiraine and Lan talk to each other, the reveal that Liandrin is black, and the reveal that Moiraine and Lan have known about this all through Season 1. There's yet one more secret hidden in that scene, but it takes us a bit further afield, and it is related to the 4 ta'veren comment Moiraine makes. That comment has been widely criticized, but in fact it also hides a secret. The comment and its secret are closely linked to another question that people have been asking about Episode 1. How did Moiraine know that the potential dragon candidates were Rand, Perrin, Mat, and Egwene? The obvious answer appears to be that Moiraine does some research in the village and discovers the birth dates of the 4 kids. The hint we get for that is in the Nynaeve pool scene, where Moiraine indicates that she was unable to find Nynaeve's birth date, which suggests that she tried the same thing for the others. However, that is not actually what happened, and the evidence for that is hidden in a small dialogue between Lan and Moiraine. For that, we first need to look at the timeline of events in the village. Lan and Moiraine arrive in the village late in the evening. It is dark outside and raining, so everyone would be either in their homes or in the Winespring Inn, celebrating Egwene's admission to the Women's Circle. They enter the Winespring Inn and look around. The conversation in the inn dies down. The only people they talk to are Nynaeve and Meryn Alvear. Meryn escorts them to their room, and shortly after that they have a bath. In the bathtub they have the following conversation. Lan asks Moiraine, "You think it's one of them?" Moiraine does not directly respond, but Lan interprets her reaction as yes. Lan then asks, "Which one?" and the scene cuts away. We do not see Moraine's response. However, she answers the same question later in this episode, and then states that she does not know. One interesting question is why Lan asks the question in the first place. He must be thinking that Moiraine now might know something that she did not know the last time they talked, which was before they entered the Two Rivers. The only new information Moiraine could possibly have now comes from looking at everyone in the inn, because by this time they did not have the opportunity to talk to anyone or to perform any kind of research in the village. The other interesting question is who Lan means by them. The most obvious explanation is Lan means everyone in the inn, but then the dialogue between Moiraine and Lan makes no sense. If Moiraine knows that one of the people in the inn is the dragon, then the only way for her to know is if she identified one of them, so why would she then state that she does not know which one it is? What Lan probably means by them is one of the 4 ta'veren, but that suggests that Lan and Moiraine already knew who the 4 ta'veren were when Lan and Moiraine arrived. This means that they had physical descriptions of all 4. With that interpretation, the scene makes sense. Moiraine and Lan enter the inn, and they both recognize the 4 ta'veren. Even the camera work confirms that, because the camera focuses on the 4 ta'veren at that point, indicating Moraine's viewpoint. Moiraine and Lan then have a chance to estimate the age of them, and can confirm that all of them are around the right age for potential dragons. When Lan asks his question in the bathtub, Moiraine is already certain that one of them is the dragon, not because she has identified one of them, but rather because otherwise it would have been too much of a coincidence for the pattern to spin out 4 ta'veren in a single village, all of them the right age for the dragon. She still does not know who the dragon is, though. This means Moraine's 4 ta'veren comment earlier in the episode did not just mean that Moiraine knows that the total number of ta'veren in the Two Rivers is 4, which would indeed be difficult to justify, but rather that she had received information about 4 specific ta'veren in the Two Rivers along with their physical descriptions. This confirms secret number 4. Moiraine had the physical descriptions of all 4 ta'veren before coming to the Two Rivers. So where would she get that information from? It must have come from someone with a ta'veren seeing talent, and the only people we know are Siuan Sanche, Logain Ablar, and Nicola Treehill. We can rule out the first 2, because we know that they could not possibly have been in the Two Rivers at the time the ta'veren must have been discovered. What about Nicola Treehill? As mentioned in an earlier video, the folks at What Series made an interesting casting discovery. Apparently the actress Sally Saleh has been cast for the role of Elsa Treehill for Season 2. There is no such character in the books, but the last name Treehill suggests that Elsa may be a sister of Nicola Treehill. There has also been a suggestion that this character is a combination of Elsa Grinwell and Nicola Treehill, but I think this is less likely, because the first name does not match. It's Elsa versus Elsa. Also, Elsa Grinwell and Nicola Treehill are too different in character, attributes, and in the roles they play for them to likely be combined into a single character. I think it is more likely that the writers simply wanted to have a different character with the last name Treehill, because they want to keep the option open for Nicola to show up in a Saludar storyline in a later season. So why would they need another character with the last name of Treehill? Possibly because they need another character with a ta'veren seeing talent, and using the same last name implies that the talent runs in the Treehill family. This could lead to a storyline somewhat like this. A few years before the events of the show, Elsa Treehill went to the White Tower to enroll as a novice. While she was there, it was discovered that she had the talent to see ta'veren. One way this could have happened is that perhaps the ruler of a country who was ta'veren came to the tower for a meeting with the Amyrlin, and while he or she was there, Elsa saw a glow around that person, leading to the discovery of her talent. Once Siuan had been informed of that, she may have come up with the idea of sending Elsa out into the world, with another Aes Sedai at her side, to find ta'veren and report back on them. The idea would have been to forward information to Moiraine about any ta'veren Elsa had found, to help Moiraine decide where to search for the Dragon Reborn. Shortly before the events of Season 1, Elsa happened to go to the Two Rivers, saw 4 ta'veren there, and her report eventually reached Moiraine. Elsa only identified 4 of the 5 ta'veren, probably Rand, Perrin, Mat, and Egwene. She apparently missed Nynaeve, perhaps because Nynaeve was not in a village at that time. We know from Dana and from Padan Fain that the Shadow knows about all 5 ta'veren, including Nynaeve. From a storytelling perspective, it was important that Nynaeve was not included in the list of ta'veren Moiraine initially knew about. That's because if Moiraine had known, then she would not have left the Two Rivers so easily with only 4 ta'veren. She would likely have tried harder to find Nynaeve, causing plot complications. Since the character of Elsa Treehill has actually been cast in Season 2, there will likely be a reference to these events in Season 2 in some form. As mentioned in earlier videos, I expect Elsa Treehill to recognize Egwene in the tower, both because of Egwene's ta'veren aura, and also because Elsa likely remembers Egwene's face. This would then lead to a dialogue between Elsa and Egwene, which would explain to viewers where the 4 ta'veren rumor came from. This means how Moiraine knew whom to take with her. It is even possible that we will see a scene with Elsa and the Two Rivers, either as a flashback from the scene where she meets Egwene, or perhaps combined with the Episode 1 cold open. With that, we are now finally done with the Liandrin chase scene, after having discovered 4 secrets. Let's move on to Episode 6, and the scene between Moiraine and Siuan in their little love shack, which contains another secret. Only one part of the scene is noteworthy with respect to Liandrin, and that is Siuan's complaint, "Skin me and salt me if you don't take idiotic risks." The question is what risks Siuan is referring to. She could not be referring to any event in the tower, since Moiraine did not take any risks there. She most likely refers to the fact that Moiraine took Nynaeve to Liandrin. Siuan and Moiraine did not have any chance to talk to each other before that scene, so Siuan has no way of knowing at this time that Moiraine was injured and that Moiraine did not make the decision to go to Liandrin's camp by herself. Lan made that decision, and he probably did not even know that Liandrin was in that camp. Siuan does not know that, though. The question then is why it would be an idiotic risk for Moiraine to take Nynaeve to Liandrin. The reason is that this could potentially allow Liandrin to figure out Moiraine's mission of finding the Dragon Reborn in the following way. Liandrin would first have to determine which region Nynaeve is from. This means the Two Rivers. Then Liandrin would also have to know that there were ta'veren in the Two Rivers, which she might know because we later find out from Padan Fain that the Shadow knows about the ta'veren, so Liandrin, being black, might also know. With that information, Liandrin could piece everything together. She might wonder why Moiraine has been in the Two Rivers, a place where there are ta'veren. Is Moiraine perhaps looking for ta'veren? If so, is she looking for a particular ta'veren, perhaps the most important ta'veren currently alive? Liandrin probably comes very close to figuring out Moiraine's mission, so Siuan's concern is justified. Liandrin clearly tries to find out where Nynaeve is from. We know from other scenes that it is possible to tell where a person is from based on their accent and clothing. Tom figures out that Mat is from the Two Rivers, and Aram figures out that Perrin and Egwene are from the Mountains of Mist, the mountain range west of the Two Rivers. Liandrin apparently does not have that skill, so she has to ask Nynaeve. Since Nynaeve probably would not respond to a direct question, Liandrin decides to do something a bit more underhanded by asking her, "It's Nynaeve, isn't it? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. I can't quite place the accent." Liandrin is of course intentionally mispronouncing Nynaeve's name. The only way this kind of mispronunciation could be unintentional is if Liandrin has read Nynaeve's name somewhere. This means if she knows the spelling of a name, but not the pronunciation. That clearly does not happen here. Nynaeve's name was spoken in the camp, but there's no indication that it was ever written, so everyone who knows her name also knows her pronunciation, and that pronunciation must originally have come from Lan, Moiraine, or even Nynaeve herself, so we know that it would have been correct. What Liandrin is trying to do here is provoke an answer from Nynaeve, such as, "It's pronounced Nynaeve, the accent is from the Two Rivers." Luckily, Nynaeve does not fall for the trick, and she may unknowingly be protecting Moiraine's mission that way. Nynaeve probably sees right through what Liandrin is trying to do, and that may also explain why Nynaeve is even more hostile than usual towards Liandrin. Liandrin does eventually figure out that all of the boys and girls came from the Two Rivers, as we found out later in the Man from North Harbor scene, but she likely discovered it much later, after everyone arrived in Tar Valon. Also, we don't know if that information was ultimately sufficient for Liandrin to also figure out Moiraine's mission. That might be revealed in Season 2. Going back to the Love Shack scene, the important piece of information here is that Siuan is correct in stating that Moiraine took a big risk, but the only way she could come to that conclusion is if she knows that Liandrin was black. If nobody in the camp had been black, then none of them would have known that the dragon had even been reborn, so Moiraine's mission would never have been in any danger, hence no idiotic risk. This means the fact that Siuan does make that remark about an idiotic risk proves that she knows at that time that Liandrin was black. For Siuan to be able to see the risk, she must also know that there are ta'veren in the Two Rivers. She probably found out about that from the same source as Moiraine. We therefore have secret number 5. Siuan knows that Liandrin is black. Of course, that was likely anyway, considering that Moiraine knows that Liandrin was black and that she has been cooperating closely with Siuan. If it was Moiraine who found this out first, then she would likely have informed Siuan about this at the first opportunity. Next, I will look at the scene between Moiraine and Alanna in episode 5, not because there is a secret hidden in it, but because some information in that scene is important to analyze the Tower trial scene in episode 6. There are 3 important pieces of information we learned from this scene. First, Alanna clearly does not know yet that Liandrin is black, based on the way she describes Liandrin. Alanna simply assumes that Liandrin is a very powerful and ambitious Red Sister. Second, Alanna implicitly trusts Moiraine. This is most obvious from the fact that she encourages Moiraine to challenge Siuan. This means to attempt to overthrow her in some way. Because of the first oath, this is a very dangerous thing to suggest to anyone, even a close friend. Third, Moiraine does not reciprocate that trust. At the end of this scene, Alanna reminds Moiraine that one day Moiraine will have to trust someone with her secrets. This can of course be considered foreshadowing for the later reveal that Moiraine trusts Siuan, but we will see a bit later that there is a chance that this was also foreshadowing for a meeting between Alanna and Moiraine that may happen off-screen between episodes 5 and 6. More about that later. Now we jump back to episode 6, to the Tower trial scene, specifically to the point where Liandrin, Moiraine and Alanna are questioned by Siuan in front of the hall, right after Logain was sentenced. This scene starts by Siuan accusing Liandrin of illegally gentling Logain in the field, and Liandrin then defends herself by arguing that she had no other choice, since Logain was too strong and would have killed more Aes Sedai before everyone had been able to reach the tower. Liandrin's defense is somewhat disingenuous, because we know that she has also gentled men in the field in situations where there was no danger to Aes Sedai, for example at the beginning of episode 1. Liandrin's primary goal in this dialogue is to get Siuan to make some sort of an accommodation for gentling in the field, at least in exceptional cases. That's because Liandrin's mission as Black Ajah is apparently to specifically gentle any person who could potentially be the Dragon Reborn. She cannot take those men to the tower because Siuan has the ability to see ta'veren and would likely not allow any ta'veren to be gentled. This means the only way Liandrin could possibly gentle the Dragon Reborn is in the field. As we found out earlier, Siuan already knows at this time that Liandrin is Black Ajah. This means Siuan also knows that she cannot possibly allow gentling in the field, since that would make it more likely that the Dragon Reborn ends up being gentled. Because of that, the outcome of this trial is a foregone conclusion, and Siuan has to rule against Liandrin in this matter, regardless of how Liandrin defends herself. Next we get one of the most jaw-dropping moments in this episode, when Alanna interrupts the dialogue between Siuan and Liandrin, and defends Liandrin, making the argument that Karenni died to protect the others. This part of the scene is difficult to analyze because there are different ways to interpret Alanna's arguments and the motives for it. The most obvious, straightforward interpretation is that Alanna feels exactly as she states, perhaps because Liandrin convinced her in the Logain camp that Logain really was too strong and had to be gentled in the field. In this case, there would be nothing more to this part of the scene than Alanna stating her opinion and Moiraine then supporting her friend by agreeing with her publicly. However, I have my doubts about that for several reasons. First, Alanna earlier, while in the Logain camp, stated to Moiraine that she's worried about letting the Reds gentle the dragon, and then not having the dragon with them in the last battle. Alanna must realize that if she sides with Liandrin here, it would become more likely that the Red get permission to gentle in the field, and that exactly what Alanna is afraid of might actually happen. Second, Karenni has made it clear what her opinion is regarding gentling in the field. By siding with Liandrin, Alanna puts herself into opposition to her deceased head of Arja, Karenni, and therefore probably also to the Green Arja as a whole, as well as to the Blue and the Amyrlin. Alanna must realize that ingratiating herself to Liandrin would never give her any advantages, because if Liandrin were to become Amyrlin, then as a Red sister, she would still never support a Green sister. Third, Alanna has to realize that Liandrin did not actually care about Karenni in any way. Liandrin and Karenni were essentially enemies. What angered Liandrin in that Loghain scene is not that something had happened to Karenni, but rather that a mere man had dared to use the one power against a woman, and that is why Liandrin became so infuriated that she got close to burning herself out. Alanna surely knows Liandrin's character well enough to understand Liandrin's true motivation here, so I cannot imagine that Alanna feels any true gratitude towards Liandrin. Fourth, Alanna must also realize that she sets a dangerous precedent here. Maigan later explains to Moiraine how highly unusual it is for a Green or a Blue sister to support a Red, so I would not expect Alanna to do so voluntarily, without any pressure. If Siuan had forced her to take sides, then Alanna's behavior would be somewhat more understandable, but for her to cut into the dialogue between Siuan and Liandrin just to support Liandrin seems extremely odd. Alanna actually has two good reasons to side with Siuan here, not Liandrin. One is that Alanna considers Liandrin her enemy, who is already in a weakened situation here, so this would be a good opportunity for Alanna to score points with Siuan. Also, Karenni was Alanna's head of Arja and had previously given a direct order that men were not to be gentled in the field. That order is likely still binding at this time, since no new head of Arja had apparently been elected yet for the Green. This means Alanna is probably bound to Karenni's order both legally as well as via her loyalty to Karenni. It is hard to imagine that Alanna would choose to ignore that order and voluntarily side with Liandrin without being ordered to do so. There is no alternative explanation for Alanna's behavior in this scene, which I think is perhaps more likely, and certainly more interesting, and that is that Alanna follows a deliberate strategy Moiraine and Alanna both agreed on off-screen, ahead of the meeting. If that is true, then there are two questions. One is why they decided to do that, and the other question is how they are able to make statements in front of the hall that go against their own opinions, and therefore appear to violate the First Oath. Let's look at the second question first, to see if we can find any Aes Sedai trickery in Moiraine's and Alanna's statements that might explain what they really think about Liandrin. First, here's Alanna's full statement. I beg the Amyrlin's clemency. Karenni died to protect us because she knew that the false dragon was too strong. Liandrin made the right choice. We all did. Here's what the Hall of the Tower reads into this. Karenni died to protect us because she knew that the false dragon was too strong to be taken all the way to the tower. The way Karenni died is by creating a situation where Loghain attacked the group, thus allowing the group to gentle him in self-defense. Karenni's sacrifice came from the fact that she died during Loghain's attack. Liandrin made the right choice in gentling Loghain in the field. We all did. This matches perfectly with Liandrin's claim that Loghain was too strong to be taken to the tower, so the Hall would interpret this as Alanna supporting Liandrin, which is exactly the misinterpretation Alanna intends. Of course, we all know that this is not what actually happened, and Alanna also knows that this is not what happened. We know that Karenni was strictly against gentling Loghain in the field, and had already rejected Liandrin's earlier suggestion to provoke a self-defense situation. In particular, the part where Alanna states that Karenni knew that the false dragon was too strong is simply not true. Karenni's opinion was the exact opposite, and there is no indication that Karenni ever changed her mind. This means Alanna could not possibly mean this interpretation of her statement, because it would be a lie, and the First Oath would not allow her to say it if that was what she meant. So what does she mean, then, to herself when speaking those lines to get past the First Oath? Probably something like this. Karenni died to protect us when Loghain was attacking us, because she knew that the false dragon was too strong with his attack on the group for the attack to be survivable. Karenni put up protective barriers around everyone to help them survive, but did not have enough time for her own barrier, thus causing her to die, and that was her sacrifice. Liandrin made the right choice at some point in her life, for example when choosing Red Arja. We all did, at some point. This represents the actual truth, and is an interpretation of Alanna's statement that would let her bypass the First Oath. Of course, it in no way supports Liandrin's description of the events. So this is the evidence we were looking for, that what Alanna means is not what the Hall reads into her statements. Alanna does not really agree with Liandrin about the issue of gentling Logain. She uses Aes Sedai word trickery to make the Hall believe that she's on Liandrin's side when she is really not. This is the only way Alanna could say what she does without violating the First Oath. Next, let's look at Moiraine's statement to see if we find a similar pattern there. Moiraine stated, "If we hadn't tamed him, Mother, all of our sisters would have been killed, not just Karenni." The Hall interprets this as something like, "If we hadn't gentled him, Mother, all of our sisters would have been killed during the trip to the White Tower, not just Karenni." There is no hard evidence that Moiraine does not mean what she says, but her use of the word tamed instead of gentled strongly suggests that Moiraine does not really mean gentled, but wanted to make room for a different interpretation of her statement. If she meant gentled, she would say that, since tamed is an unusual word to be used with humans. So what does she mean then to herself to get past the First Oath, assuming she does not agree with Liandrin? Probably something like this. "If we hadn't kept our shield on him, Mother, all of our sisters would have been killed from an attack by Logain, not just Karenni." So the ambiguity in Moiraine's statement comes from 2 points, the word tamed and the location of the presumed Aes Sedai deaths. This is beautiful use of Aes Sedai word trickery, which was nicely foreshadowed by a dialogue between Moiraine and Egwene in episode 2, where Moiraine states, "We will always tell the truth. It just may not be the truth you think you hear, so listen carefully." At this point we have strong indications that Alanna could not mean what the Hall interpreted into her statement, and that Moiraine likely does not mean it. This means there is high confidence that we have found secret number 6. Alanna and Moiraine fake their support for Liandrin and have a hidden motive. Which brings us to the question why they decide to follow this strategy. This means, what is their motive? To understand why, we have to look at what would happen if Moiraine and Alanna sided with Siuan instead. Siuan would still make the same ruling, but then it would look like Siuan was siding with Moiraine and Alanna against Liandrin. This means the ruling would look partisan. Liandrin would certainly try to exploit that perception and accuse Siuan of showing favoritism for the blue against the red, just like Liandrin does later in the scene in a different context. By siding with Liandrin, Moiraine and Alanna take that argument away from Liandrin. This means Siuan's decision now looks like a simple matter of Tower policy, affecting all Argyrs, not like a ruling specifically against the red. This helps keep the Argyrs united, at least for the moment. The idea of trying to create division within the Tower by attempting to split the Argyrs is a well-known strategy from the Black Argyr playbook. We know that this happened frequently in the centuries before the events of the show, and in the books that strategy is also used later by Alviarin in her role as keeper for Elaida. What might have happened before this scene is that Moiraine, while preparing for this hearing, predicted that Liandrin would act that way, and realized that she and Alanna both would have to side with Liandrin. Moiraine would then have gone to see Alanna again, off-screen, between the events of episodes 5 and 6, and convinced Alanna to side with Liandrin. I imagine that Alanna did not agree to this easily, and that Moiraine likely had to tell Alanna that Liandrin is Black Argyr, which had been one of her secrets up until that point. If this meeting happened, then Alanna's comment in episode 5 that one day Moiraine will have to trust someone with her secrets would have been a form of foreshadowing for this off-screen event. This leads to the next secret in this scene, secret number 7. Alanna and Moiraine likely have an off-screen planning meeting, with Moiraine informing Alanna that Liandrin is black. The knowledge of Moiraine, Siuan, and Alanna that Liandrin is black is rather carefully hidden in Season 1, so I expect it will play a major role in Season 2, possibly in the context of Eleida's rise to power. If Elaida were to find out that Siuan knew Liandrin is black and did not arrest her, Elaida would likely consider Siuan to share some guilt for the Black Argyr raid. Even though there are no further secrets in the Tower trial scene, I'll continue with its analysis, mostly because the motivations of all characters and the dynamics between them will likely be important in Season 2. Once Siuan has ruled against Liandrin, Liandrin is clearly frustrated by the fact that she neither got the ruling she wanted, nor was she able to cause division between the Argyrs. After a moment, she comes up with her next plan of attack, which is to use Nynaeve as a starting point to attack Moiraine, accusing her of incompetence and excessive secrecy. At that point, Maegan intervenes and unfortunately misreads the situation. She attempts to protect Moiraine by suggesting that Moraine's actions are a matter for the Blue Argyr, but that only plays into Liandrin's hand. Liandrin responds immediately and doubles down on her accusation that this is a matter of blue versus red, suggesting that Siuan may not be impartial. Siuan now has no other choice but to question Moiraine, who now needs to find a way to keep the Argyrs united without giving away her mission. She clearly cannot defend herself, because that would only divide the Argyrs further, so she decides to do the opposite and unite the Arjas against herself and behind Siuan. She does that by being intentionally defiant and disobedient at the first opportunity she has, which is the question about the purpose of her mission. Moiraine tells herself that the proper answer to that question is, the purpose of my mission is to search for the Dragon Reborn. She also knows that she was ordered by Tamra 20 years ago not to disclose any information related to the Dragon Reborn, and that fact allows her to respond to that question with, I cannot say, without lying. Siuan realizes what Moiraine is doing and plays into it by harshly accusing Moiraine of disobedience and thereby uniting all the Arjas behind her, even the Red, who probably appreciate the fact that Siuan is not covering up for a Blue. The only people in the hall who understand what is actually happening here are Siuan and Moiraine. Everyone else is fooled by their performance. At the end, Liandrin has suffered a complete defeat, achieving not even a single one of her goals. She wanted to get approval for gentling the field, find out about Moiraine's mission, split the Arjas, and weaken Siuan. None of that has happened. On the contrary, Siuan appears to have stronger support from the hall after the meeting than before. The final scene I'm going to look at is the scene in which Moiraine gives her oath of exile on the Oath Rod. There's a secret hidden in the wording of Moraine's oath, specifically in the phrasing, until she calls me home. The wording of the Oath of Exile, with unrelated parts removed, is, I, Moiraine Sedai, do swear to never return until Siuan Sanche calls me home. What is home for Moiraine? We might assume that home means the White Tower, but Moiraine actually denies that in episode 5 and explains what home means to her. This happens in a scene near the beginning of the episode, shortly after the opening credits. Here's the transcript. Lan, a long time since we've been home. Lan says that while looking at the White Tower, this means he's referring to the tower as his home. Moiraine, do you still think of it as home? Lan, don't you? Moiraine, the saddle is home, this cloak, these boots, this brooding man at my side. By the first oath, we know Moraine's statements to be true, at least from her point of view, which is all that matters for how oaths are interpreted. Her home is no longer the White Tower, but her horse and her water. This means calls me home does not mean calls me to the White Tower, but rather calls me to my saddle and my water, or worded differently, sends me out onto the road. Interestingly, that is exactly what happened. Earlier in episode 6, Siuan asked Moiraine to go to the Eye of the World to fight the Dark One, and right after Moiraine swears the oath, Siuan adds, It is done, now turn and face your sisters, and leave this tower. Moiraine has clearly been sent out of the tower onto her mission, where she will be with Aldeep and Lan, so the conditions for being called home have been met. The Oath of Exile should have dropped off at this moment. This results in secret number 8. Moraine's Oath of Exile has dropped off. This does not necessarily mean that Moiraine can just walk back into the tower anytime she chooses to, because the other sisters clearly believe that Moiraine is unable to do so, and if Moiraine does it anyway, suspicion would fall onto Siuan about how she conducted the Oath of Exile. Rather, what this does is create a situation in which Moiraine technically can enter the tower, but if she did so and was to be discovered, then from the Hall's point of view, she would have broken the terms of her exile. Since this would cast suspicion on Siuan as well, such a discovery would take down both Moiraine and Siuan. This appears to be the plot device the writers used to ensure that both Moiraine and Siuan are imprisoned in the tower at the end of Season 2. This was the last secret in Season 1 that I intended to talk about, so let's now move on to the second part of this video, where I'm going to be talking about predictions for Season 3 and beyond. First, let's look at the scope of Season 3. We have heard from Rafe that Season 3 will include Book 4, The Shadow Rising. We also have strong reason to believe that Tear will not be included in Season 2 or 3, as explained earlier. This means the part of Book 4 that we can expect to be included in Season 3 starts somewhere between chapters 18 and 22. Those are the chapters in which the various groups all leave the Stone of Tear. This means roughly the first third of the book will be skipped, and only the last 2/3 can be adapted for Season 3. So there is not enough material here for a full season, especially considering that we need to adapt 14 books into 8 seasons. This means, on average, about 1.75 books per season. So what this means is that we will not only see the content of Book 4 in Season 3, but also a good part of Book 5, The Fires of Heaven. How deeply into Book 5 the show will go during Season 3 will likely vary by plot thread. We can expect to get the following 4 major plot arcs. The A-plot is the storyline in the Idle Waste. It starts with a group of characters transporting to the Idle Waste, and will likely end with that group leaving the Idle Waste, and the battle for Cairhien, since that battle would make for an excellent season finale. The A plot is the only storyline for which both the beginning and the end are predefined. None of the other storylines have a clearly defined hard ending in Book 5, so it would be up to the writers to decide how much of each storyline to include in Season 3, and at what point to cut over into Season 4. The B plot is the storyline in the Two Rivers. We know that it will be included in the show because What Series has reported that the Two Rivers set has been rebuilt for Season 3 shooting. The C plot is the Tanchico storyline, which ends in Salidar. We have a hint that we will get that storyline in Season 3, because during Season 3 Writer's Room, Rafe commented in a tweet about writing stories for the Sea Folk. The only way the Sea Folk could fit into Season 3 is for transportation between Falme and Tanchico, so that comment by Rafe confirms the Tanchico storyline. The D plot is Elida's coup in the White Tower, followed by the journey from the White Tower to Salidar. We don't have any direct confirmation about this storyline, but as explained in earlier videos, there are hints in Season 1 that we will get to see Elida's coup, and the Salidar storyline itself is so important for Egwene's later character arc that it is hard to imagine that it would be skipped in the show. Next, let's look at how our 7 main characters are distributed across those 4 storylines. We will start by assigning them the same way as in the books, but unfortunately once we do that we run into several problems. First of all, we have 5 out of 7 main characters in a single storyline in the Isle Waste. Having that many characters in one place is not necessarily always a problem. We had 6 main characters in a single location in episode 2 of Season 1, but then they were on a single storyline, escaping from the Trollocs and heading to Tar Valon, and they were doing everything together, riding, eating, sleeping, singing, so they did not each have their own storyline. This will be different in Season 3, because at least Rand and Egwene will each have their own storyline. Rand's story is about becoming the Caracarn, and Egwene's story is about training to become a Dreamwalker. None of these stories really have room for Moraine, Lan, or Mat, and none of those 3 really have any interesting events by themselves in Book 4 in the Isle Waste, with the exception of Rhuidean, which will probably only take up a single episode. This means unless the writers want Moraine, Lan, and Mat to just run alongside Rand and Egwene for the whole season, having them in the Isle Waste creates a real problem. The writers could of course invent new stories for the 3 of them, but not only is that difficult to do in the middle of a desert, but it would also dilute the screen time available to Egwene and Rand, so it is not ideal. The best option would be to move all 3 of them into completely different storylines in different locations. Next there's the B plot in the Two Rivers. Here we have Perrin, which is fine, but Perrin needs a second person. This means someone to talk to. This is especially important for Perrin since he's so introverted and the audience would not be able to understand what he's thinking otherwise. In the books that partner is Gaul, but for a TV show that is also problematic for 2 reasons. First of all, having Gaul in the Two Rivers only makes sense if Bane and Chiad are also there, so now the show would have to pay for 3 actors in recurring speaking roles who have almost no plot involvement for at least 2 seasons. That is pretty expensive just as a partner for Perrin. Also, when a show lead like Perrin has a lot of dialogue scenes with someone else, and those dialogue scenes are used for character development, then ideally the partner should be another show lead, or at least an important recurring character, because that way the show could advance character development on 2 characters at once. Gaul is too unimportant for this, and spending a lot of time on advancing his character is really not a good use of screen time. This means the B plot has an opening available for another show lead. The obvious choice, of course, is to use Mat for this. This means to have Mat go to the Two Rivers with Perrin in Season 3, instead of the Isle Waste. This would only be for the first half of Season 3. After that, Mat would have to go to Cairhien, so he can participate in the battle for Cairhien. There are hints in Season 1 that the writers intend to do that, because, as I explained earlier, one key change that the writers made regarding Mat is that show Mat, unlike book Mat, has stated multiple times that he wants to go back to the Two Rivers. I believe that this has been set up in preparation for Season 3 to give Mat a reason to go back. At the beginning of Season 3, once Mat finds out that Perrin intends to go back to the Two Rivers, Mat will simply decide to join Perrin. This allows the show to deal with a lot of dangling plot threads from Season 1. For example, what happened to Mat's sisters after he left? What happened to his parents in the past, leading to their dysfunctional relationship? Who did Mat and his sisters mourn over during Beltane? Perhaps another sibling who died? All of these issues could be addressed in Season 3 if Mat returned to the Two Rivers. More about other changes I expect to see for this plot line in a moment. Next we have the C plot in Tanchico. From a character perspective, the storyline is in good shape. It only has Nynaeve as a show lead, but she's paired with Elaine, a very important recurring character, so it makes sense for the show to invest in character development for both of those characters. Finally, there's the D plot from the Tower to Salidar. This one has a lot of problems, because we only have side characters in this plot. Keeping it as is would mean that a significant amount of screen time would have to be taken away from show leads and assigned to side characters. Also, any plot that does not contain show leads usually results in less viewer engagement, so ideally 1 or 2 show leads should be assigned to the storyline. The obvious solution is to move Moiraine and Lan from the Idle Waste storyline to the Salidar storyline. This solves all of the issues related to character assignment, and nicely balances out both the distribution of show leads across storylines as well as their screen times. Now we also have all of the pieces in place to look back at one of the predictions I made earlier in this video series, and that is that Moiraine and Lan will be in the White Tower at the end of the season, imprisoned, with Moiraine stilled, which is needed to move them onto the Salidar storyline. There are at least 6 separate hints that this will happen in Season 2. First, it avoids diluting the Idle storyline by thinning out the number of characters in the Idle Waste. Second, it gives Moiraine her own storyline for the season. Third, it assigns show leads to the Salidar storyline so that the screen time for telling that story does not have to be assigned to side characters. Fourth, it solves a potential problem if Sophie Okonedo decides to leave the show after Season 2, which seems likely according to persistent rumors. If this were to happen, then the show would need someone else in Salidar who advocates for Egwene to be summoned and raised as Amyrlin. Moiraine would be the best choice for that. Fifth, as I mentioned earlier and detailed in a separate video, Moiraine appears to be both stilled and shielded at the end of Season 1, which appears to have been done specifically to allow her to drop into the Salidar storyline, for which she needs to be stilled. And sixth, one of the secrets I described earlier is that the Oath of Exile Moiraine swore in Season 1 has a loophole that caused it to drop off immediately. This created a situation where Moiraine is technically able to enter the tower but not permitted to do so, and if she does so anyway and is caught, then this will not only cause her to be punished for it, but also Siuan, who administered the oath. It looks like that whole exile oath subplot was put in place specifically to provide a reason for Moiraine and Siuan to both be imprisoned at the end of the season. For Siuan, this will be the main reason for her to be deposed, and for Moiraine, it will be the plot device that puts her into the right place to start the Salidar story arc. Since there are so many hints pointing in the same direction, I feel pretty confident in predicting that Moiraine will not be in Falme at the end of Season 2, and that she will also not proceed to the Idle Waste in Season 3, but instead will end Season 2 in the White Tower, and then continue to Salidar in Season 3. So now that we have all show leads assigned to storylines, we can start looking at the actual plot. I will concentrate mostly on what changes I expect from the books. First, the Idle Waste plot, which I think will be pretty close to the books. I expect Rhuidean to be shortened somewhat with fewer and shorter scenes. Imra's stand will likely be cut, and instead I expect Khorne Rock's Hold to be expanded, with a full set, a lot of exposition of the Idle culture, and probably with a major Shadowspawn attack. After that, Alcair Dal and the Asmodean fight in Rhuidean. Traveling across the mountains will probably also be shortened, and the storyline will end with a battle for Cairhien. Next, there's the Two Rivers storyline. Apart from having Mat in that location, here are the biggest changes I expect from the books. Perrin's family will likely still be alive when the group arrives, and will be killed later for 2 reasons. It makes their deaths more meaningful if the audience got to see them first. Also, the Perrin-Faile relationship will not be very advanced yet when the group arrives in the Two Rivers, so the scene from the books in which Faile comforts Perrin when he's grieving would not work at that time. That scene is important for the character development of both Perrin and Faile, so I don't think the show will cut it. Delaying the deaths of Perrin's family would make that scene more believable. The other big change I expect is that the sequence of events will likely be changed. I expect the Battle for the Two Rivers to be the first major event in the storyline, as the mid-season event of Season 3, with the abduction storyline delayed until after the battle. This means both events will happen in the opposite order. This would also allow Faile to be one of the characters who were abducted, and it would give Perrin an opportunity to save his wife. I explained in the last video why the Maldon storyline will likely be cut from the show, so giving Perrin a chance to save his wife here would be a partial replacement of the Maldon storyline. That part of the story probably won't play out in Season 3 though. I expect the abduction itself to happen late in Season 3, but the rescue will probably be delayed until Season 4. Then there's the issue of how and when Mat gets back to Cairhien, so that he can participate in the battle there and kill Couladin. That will probably happen after the Battle for the Two Rivers. The writers would need some plot device to give Mat a reason to go to Cairhien. I don't know what they will use, but here's one option. Imagine Matt's sisters channel for the first time during the battle. We know they are sparkers, so they might spark during the battle, for example in a situation when Trollocs threaten them. Alanna, who will likely be in the Two Rivers during the battle, would notice what happened and tell Matt that he needs to take his sisters to the White Tower. At that time, she does not know about Elyda's coup yet. Alanna, Matt, and his sisters leave towards Tar Valon, and along the way, somewhere between Whitebridge and Caemlyn, they run into Tom, leading to the long-expected Matt-Tom reunion. Tom would already know about the coup and advised the group not to go to the White Tower, and they could then redirect towards Caerhun instead, for example to meet a group of Aes Sedai who earlier fled from the tower. Matt's group would arrive in Caerhun near the end of Season 3, just in time for the Shaido to lay siege on the city, and the city going into lockdown. There would then be two options for Matt to be involved in the battle. One is for the Shaido to break into the city, and for Matt to kill Couladin there. The other option is for Matt to lead a group of Caerhunian soldiers, help them break through the Shaido lines, and travel to Rand's group, which is coming down from the mountains. This would then lead to a Rand-Matt reunion, and the storyline after that simply follows the books. Having Matt travel from the Two Rivers to Caerhun during Season 3 would have another advantage. It would bring Bella back into the storyline. Bella probably returned to the Two Rivers after the Salidar events in Season 1. Matt or the girls could ride her to Caerhun, and then from there to Salidar, which would put her in the right place for later seasons. In the books, it is Siuan who rides Bella from the White Tower to Salidar when Siuan flees from the White Tower. Next, we have the Tanchico storyline. I expect this to mostly follow the books, with two modifications. First, instead of Tom Merrilin or Julian Sandar, I expect Bail Dorman to travel to Tanchico with the girls on a Seafolk ship. This means it will be Bail Dorman who helps the girls find Black Alja members in Tanchico. The other change is that the events in Tanchico will start at an earlier point of the Black Alja storyline than in the books, and will have to include some of the events which in the books happen in Tyr. For example, the girls capturing and interrogating a Black Alja sister, so they know what to look for in Tanchico. This will also give them a chance to get their Twisted Stone Ring ter'angreal, so they can later meet Egwene in Teleron Riot. After that, we will get the storyline with Moghedien and the Museum Hall. I expect the girls to arrive in Salidar probably late in Season 3, or very early in Season 4. I don't know if this leaves enough time for the circus storyline, but I guess probably not, so I think the circus will likely be cut. Finally, we have the White Tower Salidar storyline. This will probably start with the coup itself, followed by Lan, Moraine, Logain, Min, and possibly Leane fleeing from the tower. I expect there to be some sort of mid-journey event between the tower and Salidar, like the Burning Barn storyline in the books, but I think it will play out differently than in the books. That's because Lan is in the group, and that somewhat changes the dynamics of the situation, so I don't think the Burning Barn story would work in the same way. The group would probably arrive in Salidar in the second half of the season, a few episodes before Nynaeve and Elayne. So much about Season 3, so now a brief look at some of the events after Season 3. There are two storylines I expect to happen that will be different from the books. One is related to the Two Rivers. I think the idea of a Manetheren uprising and eventual independence movement will be emphasized much more in the show than in the books, to the point that Manetheren will declare independence from Andor. There are two hints for that from Season 1. One is how much time the show spent on the Manetheren backstory, to the point that they even added a song about Manetheren. This was likely done in preparation for future events. Also, in the books, the village that our characters are from is called Emond's Field, and that name is never used in the show, even though all other locations from the books so far have had the same name in the show. I think the reason for this is that we will see the village officially get renamed to Aemon's Field, after King Aemon of Manetheren in a later season, and that Aemon's Field will become the capital of the new independent nation of Manetheren. Such a renaming would be a lot more meaningful if it is not just a spelling change. This kind of independent story arc could help fill in the gap in Perrin's story arc that was left behind by cutting the Malden storyline. The other major line of events beyond Season 3 that I expect to be significantly different from the books has to do with Moraine and Siuan. I expect the storyline of both book characters to be merged into a single show character, starting with Season 3. This means Show Moraine will include the storylines of both Book Moraine and Book Siuan, after Siuan was killed off earlier in Season 3. Here's what Moraine's storyline could roughly look like from Seasons 4 through 8. Moraine will be on the Book Siuan storyline throughout Season 3 into Season 4. Early in Season 4, Egwene will be summoned to Salidar and raised as Amyrlin, with Moraine advising her. Shortly after mid-season 4, when it becomes clear that the embassy sent to Rand from Salidar created a mess by provoking Rand, Egwene will send Moiraine to Caemlyn to salvage the situation, but she will be too late. Rand has already traveled to Caerhun, leading to the Dumais Wells events. Moiraine and Alanna will both follow Rand to Caerhun and from there to Dumais Wells. This would give the show a chance to include a third show lead in the Season 4 season finale at Dumais Wells, in addition to Rand and Perrin. After Dumais Wells, in early Season 5, everyone returns to Caerhun, where Min has a viewing that Moiraine needs to kill Lanfear. That will lead to the redstone doorframe scene in Caerhun, with Moiraine and Lanfear both disappearing through the doorframe, probably around mid-Season 5. This means Moiraine will now be on the Book Moiraine storyline, and she will be in the Land of the Finn from that point on. This gives the show a chance to introduce Cadsuane as a new advisor for Rand. Mat eventually rescues Moiraine, probably around mid-Season 6. This way Moiraine would be gone for a whole season, but the character would still appear in every season, which would help with advertising for the show. By the time Moiraine is back, Egwene has traveled to the area outside of Tarvalon with her group, and has started the siege on Tarvalon. Moiraine now returns to Egwene. This means she will be back on her Book Swan storyline. Once Egwene is taken by Elida's group, probably late in Season 6, Moiraine stays in the rebel camp, staying in touch with Egwene via Teleron Riot throughout Season 7. The season finale of Season 7 will likely be the Seanchan attack on the White Tower. After that, early in Season 8, Moiraine organizes Egwene's quote-unquote rescue from the White Tower, and Egwene becomes full Amyrlin. Around mid-Season 8, we will have the Fields of Merrilor meeting, and at that point Moiraine again switches back to the Book Moiraine storyline. This means she supports Rand and helps negotiate the Dragon's Peace as the Season 8 mid-season event. The remainder of Season 8 will be the last battle, and for that the writers will have to find a new task for Moiraine, because neither Book Swan nor Book Moiraine have really interesting activities during the last battle. So we're now finally getting to the end of this video series. My thanks to everyone who has had the patience to watch it all the way to the end. I may update this previous series once new information becomes available, and I will probably release a video after Season 2 drops to compare the actual season to my predictions. Plus, before that, I intend to release a video about the topic of time jumps, probably sometime in late May. However, for now I'm taking a bit of a break for JordanCon and a vacation. This is the end of this video. Thanks everyone for watching, I hope you've had fun, and please join me again for other videos on this channel. Also please like, subscribe and leave comments. The description of this video has links for all source material used in the creation of the video. Thanks again, and that's it for now.